Constantine, the first Christian Roman emperor, was not even a Christian when he became the most powerful leader in the entire world. In fact, he was an emperor who came to faith in God through a vision of a cross in the sky during a battle outside the gates of Rome in the early part of the 4th century, in the year AD 312. The Roman Empire was in a mess. The good old days of Pax Romana were long gone, and civil war had broken out. Rival generals are fighting over land and power, and one of these men is a general named Constantine. Constantine, who was born in AD 272, was ambitious and ruthless and had already distinguished himself as a soldier. At the age of 25, he led his father's cavalry at the Battle of Cybele against the Goths and cut the Gothic king's head off with his own sword. Now in command of the eastern half of the empire, he was eager to expand his authority westward and reunite Rome under one ruler. But there was another general who also had his eyes on the west, a man by the name of Maxentius. Maxentius controlled the central and western provinces of the empire. He held the traditional Roman territories like Gaul, Spain, Africa, and Italy, where Rome was located. Over time, resentment grew between these two rivals, and finally, it reached a boiling point. Constantine raised a force of 10,000 troops and marched them across the Alps into northern Italy, where Maxentius awaited him with a massive army of 30,000 men. All signs pointed to disaster for Constantine. He was outnumbered 3-1, and the veteran soldiers under Maxentius's command far outnumbered his green troops. That night, camped out along the banks of the Tiber River, just outside the city of Rome, Constantine knew what was at stake. If he lost, Rome would fall into civil war. If he won, he would become the master of the entire Western Roman Empire. And so, as his men slept around him, Constantine stayed awake, praying for help. Then, according to the accounts of early church historians Eusebius and Lactantius, Constantine experienced a vision in a dream that changed his life and the fate of the world. It happened like this. As the night wore on, Constantine looked up toward the heavens and saw something miraculous. There in the sky above him glowed a brilliant cross formed of light, and emblazoned across it were the words, "In this sign conquer," or in Latin, "In hoc signo vinces." Then, immediately afterwards, the voice of Christ spoke to him, saying, "Take this sign and be thou conquered." Though some versions of the story say that Constantine received the sign while still awake and looking up into the sky. Whatever the case may be, the historian Eusebius wrote that when Constantine awoke from his dream, he ordered his soldiers to paint a certain symbol on their shields. This symbol, called the Chi-Rho monogram, was the first two Greek letters of the name Christ, Chi and Rho, forming a kind of X. Never before had such a symbol been seen upon the shields of a Roman legion. Here for the first time was the sign of Christ, and with it, Constantine felt strength and courage like never before. So the next day, when the armies met for battle at the Milvian Bridge, just outside the gates of Rome, the Christians fighting alongside Constantine were bold and fearless. Most accounts agree that despite being hopelessly outnumbered, Constantine's army defeated Maxentius and his men. And soon the bridge over the Tiber River became a scene of panic and chaos as Maxentius and his soldiers fled across the river. But unfortunately, Maxentius never made it to the other side. Legend says that he fell into the river and drowned, although his body was never recovered. As for Constantine, he stood victorious on the Milvian Bridge that day, wondering why his small army had won. He looked up into the sky and saw the sign of the cross once again. In that moment, he realized that the God of the Christians was truly victorious and worthy of praise. But he didn't stop there. He went on to embrace the Christian faith. But shortly after this battle, Constantine began to seek out Christian leaders and learn more about this God he had come to know only through a vision of a cross in the sky. Historian Eusebius wrote that Constantine sent for the Bishop of Rome and granted him an interview. Together, they discussed the vision and the role that God played in the battle. And then Constantine asked the bishop to convert him to Christianity. But this story doesn't end there, because within a year of this conversion, Constantine issued a famous edict known as the Edict of Milan. which granted freedom of worship throughout the Roman Empire. In it, he proclaimed the official end to the persecution of Christians and granted them the right to practice their religion freely. Additionally, he returned confiscated church property to the Christians and even went on to convert the former Basilica of Maxentius into a church, which is still standing today. For the first time in its nearly 300-year history, Christianity was legal in the Roman Empire. Now, it's important to clarify here that Constantine wasn't the first Roman emperor to tolerate Christianity. In the year 280, Emperor Diocletian issued an edict that allowed Christians to worship in private homes, though large gatherings were still prohibited. And that's what made the Edict of Milan so significant. It was the first time that Christians could worship freely, without fear of persecution. They could build churches, they could hold public events, and they could spread their faith publicly, without fear of being arrested. After issuing this edict, Constantine traveled to Jerusalem and visited the locations where Jesus taught and ministered. He donated money to build churches and support the poor. And in 325, he convened the First Council of Nicaea, the first ever official gathering of Christian leaders from all over the empire. There, they met together to discuss and formulate the core beliefs of the Christian faith, which would later be summarized in the Nicene Creed, still recited in churches today. Not only that, but as the decades passed, Constantine's descendants became the first generation of Roman emperors who identified as Christian. When Constantine died in 337, his son, Constantius II, inherited the throne and continued his father's legacy of promoting Christianity throughout the empire. In the end, Constantine's decision to embrace Christianity dramatically changed the course of history. The God of Abraham chose to bring the Messiah's message to the world through a Jewish baby born in Bethlehem. And then after centuries of persecution, God caused the most powerful man in the world to see a cross in the sky, thus setting the stage for Christianity to spread throughout the world. Now, was Constantine the best emperor Rome ever had? No, not really. He was, after all, an emperor who started out as a pagan, then converted to Christianity near the end of his life. Also, he wasn't perfect. In fact, he earned his reputation as a ruthless leader by persecuting pagans and Jews in his zeal to promote Christianity. But whether he fully understood it or not, Constantine was used by God to open the door for Christianity to spread freely throughout the Roman Empire. God uses ordinary people like you and me, imperfect sinners saved by grace, to do extraordinary things for His kingdom. Remember, no matter where you are in your faith, God can use you in mighty ways if you let Him.